Hello, everybody. This is Nathan with Life and Safety Consultants. I'd like to welcome you all to our webinar on what we've learned about COVID-19 over the last month or so. We have two different presenters who will be speaking today. There are a number of different people who are still joining in. We've got a good group of people already online. And again, just as a reminder, everyone will remain muted during the duration of this webinar. There will be a survey that goes out after the webinar if you have any questions that you'd like answered or any feedback or discussion on additional topics. So I do already have both Joe and TC unmuted as well as myself. So we're going to go ahead and get started. The two guys who are going to be presenting for us today are TC Gore and Joseph Woodman. TC Gore is a former flight paramedic, technical rescue specialist, and biohazard recovery and restoration field supervisor. Our presentation will start with Joe Woodman, who's also a former paramedic, technical rescue specialist, and rescue instructor. He's also done biohazard recovery and restoration field supervisor. At this point, we're going to go ahead and let Joe take over the presentation. So Joe, if you'd like to, go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Nathan. Good morning or afternoon. I guess it would only be morning for everybody. I don't know where you are in the country, but welcome aboard. My name's Joe Woodman, and I'm a retired paramedic who's worked in the emergency services, fire and EMS for over 30 years. I feel very fortunate to have survived that experience with all its ups and downs, and I am especially grateful because now I get a chance to use what I've learned in that career to apply it to my new one, which is working for life and safety and working on problems of a different scale. So why are we here today? We are all trying to find the best way to get through this crisis, this unexpected turn of events that has no easy way out and is filled with uncertainty and fear. My fellow emergency service workers and I can tell you the best tools to fight fear and uncertainty are training and knowledge, and that's why we're here. We want to discuss what we've learned in dealing with COVID-related issues in the business community and to share some of our knowledge and recommendations with you. So how do you break a seemingly impossibly large problem like a pandemic or a disaster down into manageable pieces? Let's start with something called gap analysis. Slide, please. Gap analysis helps you establish the facts and work from that point forward. The definition is gap analysis is an examination of your current performance for the purpose of identifying the differences between your current state of business and where you'd like to be. So right now, businesses and employees are keenly aware and interested in protecting themselves from health threats, especially this novel coronavirus. Many are wondering if their existing housekeeping procedures are sufficient, and if not, what additional procedures are necessary to limit health risks at work. This is a good opportunity for a gap analysis. Excuse me. So a gap analysis involves 5 steps, and I've put that graphic on your screen so you can follow along. First, you pick a problem to analyze. Then you describe your goals, what you want to achieve. You review and document the current state. In other words, you've done your goals. Now you want to figure out where you want to be. Then you go ahead and identify the gap between where you are, where you want to be, and resolve the issues. This may seem awkward and academic at first, but it works because it forces us to slow down, to carefully examine the factors involved, and to come up with a plan to get where we want to be. I liken this to what many were taught as a kid. You know, if you get lost in the forest, hug a tree. This is kind of the business version of that. When you don't know what's going on, or you know you're in the middle of a problem, don't panic, slow down, let's examine it and see what's happening. So I recently completed an assignment with a company who asked for help with COVID-related concerns in the workplace. So we'll call that the scope of my project, COVID-related concerns. Their desired outcome, or their goal, was to have effective and thorough procedures in place to enhance infection control and employee health while following procedures to reduce infection and just generally keep things clean. So the current state, where they were at when we started, none of the administrative staff or supervisors were educated or familiar with infection control processes. The employees and administrators were frightened of becoming ill and also worried that if an infection gets in the workplace, it will reduce or stop production. Many of them had concerns that were also fed by internet postings, rumors, end of the world scenarios, and natural fears, naturally, of a threat they just can't see but could hurt them. So, in addition, housekeeping was handled by a contract agency and was focused on normal office and light industrial housekeeping, not sanitation or disinfection. And there's nothing unusual about that. This particular workplace posed a variety of conflicting challenges to infection control practices just because of how unique it was and the different places involved in the building. So we identified the gaps between the desired outcome, great infection control, and the current situation. We did that through observation, interviews of administrators and plant workers and housekeeping staff. And then we reviewed current cleaning practices and the chemicals they use. So for this company, closing the gaps was relatively easy. In the manufacturing area, a disinfection program was designed and supervisors were trained and prepared to teach their employees on how to disinfect their work areas at least once each shift. Cleaning chemicals were checked to assure compatibility with the finishes that were used in production, and they were deemed to be safe. Plant safety personnel were encouraged to monitor the process randomly for compliance and to do work with supervisory staff to modify the program as needed. Because we knew that the initial plan or any kind of initial plan always needs to be reviewed and fine-tuned in the future. So regular administrative portions of the plant couldn't be handled the same way that the production floor was. The production floor was 24/7, large, open, big machines, lots of ventilation, everything else. But the office spaces are office spaces. They're more confined, generally only in use during the day. So we had to have two different cleaning procedures. Finally, we had to handle rumored dangers of COVID infection from the time clock in shared workspace with others. And that was handled through education and encouragement to practice good basic hygiene, social distancing, and hand washing. This company's response to the program improved communication with staff, it improved morale, and it closed some potential opportunities for illness to enter the workplace. Slide, please. So the company's approach is really based on and illustrated by OSHA's hierarchy of control graphic shown on your screen right now. And if you're familiar with OSHA, you've probably seen this before. It just shows that, you know, just throwing PPE at a problem is not the most effective way to avoid the problem. It's actually you start with elimination and move forward. So they didn't simply just give masks and gloves out and say, y'all be fine, don't worry about it. They instead chose to use a combination of elimination, engineering controls, and administrative controls to solve this problem. Their elimination and engineering processes included working from home, enhanced and focused disinfection programs, and closing their food service location. The administrative controls that were established included social distancing, new cleaning policies, and improved communication on workplace hazards. Finally, additional PPE was recommended for cleaning processes and any activities that increased employee vulnerability to health risks. From this point, I'd like to move on to something that I think will be valuable for the business community. They already do it, but I know a lot of this from my previous career, and that's called continuity of operations. Continuity of operations, or abbreviated as COOP, C-O-O-P, is a well-recognized concept at all levels of government and within the emergency services. As a senior EMS supervisor and rescue team leader, I dealt with this issue anytime we faced multi-day challenges, natural disasters, or large-scale emergencies. As part of our professional education, we received training from FEMA, from the National Fire Academy, state-level organizations, and even special instructors that would come out and teach us seminars on this. The reason we studied and prepared for continuity of operations is this. When it hits the fan, you have to be able to respond to that threat, and you have to be able to last for the duration of that emergency. In addition, you have to be able to recover your resources and personnel afterwards. It's no good if you burn everybody up in the first response and nobody's there for future problems. So when plan A is your only plan, you'll quickly find out that it's not sufficient, and you'll wish you'd prepared plans B and C to fall back on, and that is the spirit of continuity of operations. In my opinion, these lessons are equally valid and necessary for the business community, although they're often treated as optional or just academic exercises. Right now, business leaders are finding out just how well prepared they are or are not for unexpected and far-reaching challenges to their commercial survival. Slide, please. So this, let's drop back one to the business continuity plan. There we go. So this slide shows something from ready.gov, Homeland Security's website. There's a lot of information there for businesses that want to work on continuity of operations so that they can be there after the big event that is big to them. Maybe not to the country, perhaps just to the town, the state, the county, whatever. So this is a good place to start, but there's more to it than just this simple graphic. It definitely bears study, and I'd encourage you to look into it. Simply put, though, you should take time to thoroughly examine your business and your business's plans from a standpoint of how vulnerable are your business and your plan to threats, and then work to eliminate those threats or lessen them as much as possible. Finally, you need to test those plans for effectiveness. Go back, reevaluate, and firm them up. And you should have a plan to recover back to a normal state after an emergency plan is implemented. Let's go to the next slide, please. This shows a list of references. We'll include this later, either in the survey or somewhere. You'll see it again. But this shows some of the options out there on the web for you if you want to study continuity of operations for businesses. So what's an example of business continuity of operations? I made up a company A and B, and since my house was struck by lightning last week and I have lots of heating and air people coming and going, I'm going to use a heating and air service example. So the COVID example, the COVID pandemic hits, company A is prepared, company B is not. Company A institutes practices called administrative controls to help its field staff separate from its administrative staff. That way they don't cross-contaminate, because the administrative staff just goes to the office and the field guys go everywhere. Its continuity of operation plan states that it must protect its field workers in order to stay in business. So it trains them on infection control, equips them with PPE, modifies customer contact rules, educates customers on what to expect, and screens customer locations for known hazards. It further protects its administrative staff by eventually having them work from home as much as possible, relying on prearranged and validated online meeting providers like this, along with enhanced communication tools and processes. Company A also took the time in the past to establish an association with other contractors in its area and worked out an agreeable worker preservation program in case any one company in the association lost the ability to use its workers due to a disaster. Under normal conditions, companies definitely wouldn't share workers or cooperate in this way, but this group was a forward-looking group that decided that they needed to be ready for whatever came down the line, and this option was available. On to Company B. This kind of sounds like the ant and the grasshopper, doesn't it? So Company B did none of this. They had no plan, no financial reserves, and frankly, no imagination. Plan A was to outlast their competition and be the last one standing so they could get all the jobs. And as other providers were furloughing workers, Company B charged on and worked longer hours. They took jobs other companies wouldn't, but their crews began to get sick and couldn't work. Those who didn't get sick had to home isolate due to exposure to sick people. The administrative staff was equally sidelined because they all shared the same workspace and did not follow good hygiene practices. And the owner had pre-existing health complications, so when she was infected, she became critically ill and was hospitalized. Of course, no one else was empowered or able to fill in for her, so the remaining parts of the business decided to temporarily close for the duration of the pandemic. There was no plan to recover, and most of the employees found other work. Here's an example from my past. I'll make up a town called Smallville. So the emergency services in the town of Smallville were wiped out by a tornado. It took out the town hall, police department, fire department, and the public utilities center, as well as a significant swath of homes and businesses. So administrators, emergency service workers, and civilians alike all rose to the occasion and got to work rescuing people, managing responses, initiating disaster plans, and all that. But they couldn't work forever, and they needed relief. So this is where the continuity of operation plan comes in. This town had one. The planning sector of their disaster plan, their working division, immediately got to work contacting mutual aid, which is nearby unaffected communities, and arranging for additional resources. Public works equipment and staff were sent, fire and police equipment as well as personnel were sent, and housing and food procurement was also established for these incoming resources. Plans were set up to ensure that those who came to help the overwhelmed local providers would be relieved in a timely and effective manner and given time to recover so they could return to work and be productive on the next shift. The continuity of operation plan not only detailed who to call and what resources might be expected, but it had a plan for de-escalating the response and mitigation efforts as things returned to normal. So instead of being like Company B, the town of Smallville acted more like Company A and were able to weather this plan. So I'm used to a career where emergencies are expected. They're kind of our bread and butter. We joked that they were job security. Our profession learned that a single plan was really no plan at all. And we learned that hoping for the best almost always guaranteed failure. We learned that since we could expect worst case scenarios to happen, it was best to embrace that reality. So we made plans. We tested those plans and we trained using those plans and then modified them as we found weaknesses in them. Finally, we made sure that we could continue to respond to the next emergency even while the current one was challenging us. I believe businesses can benefit from the lessons we've learned in the emergency services and also benefit from studying the online resources available for continuity of operations, gap analysis. All these tools that you have available right now online are definitely worth your time, and that they may ensure or help assure your survival and maybe even success in trying times like these. I'm going to pass the microphone now to my friend and coworker, T.C. Gore.
Good morning, everyone. And Nathan, thank you so much for joining us. My section, we're going to discuss some of the regulatory and compliance issues that have come up with COVID and what life and safety has learned from this. Obviously, these are challenging times for us on many different fronts. And the standards that we've all applied from a worker safety standpoint, health and safety standpoint, are a little bit maybe contradictory right now. We're not really sure how to get through them. So the first thing I want to talk about is going to be the general duty clause. Slide, please. So as you can see, I've pasted a copy directly from the OSHA website. And the general duty clause states that each employer shall furnish to each of his employees employment and a place of employment which are free from recognized hazards that are causing or likely to cause death or serious physical harm to his employees. So obviously this is still in effect. We were not excused from the standard just because we have this crisis in our country going on right now. So companies should be making every effort to comply with recommendations from official bodies for things like entry restriction or surveying of employees before they enter the workplace, maybe distancing, working from home, clean, hygiene, sanitation, maybe some flexible shift hours, or at least plan for properly dealing with those that have potential exposures or get sick. Obviously, there's a lot to this, but each company should really be trying for shoot for the upper shelf on this, because we have to be sure that we're meeting the spirit of the general duty clause, not only from a legal standpoint for compliance with OSHA, but also just from a moral standpoint to take care of our workforce. The largest key to this is going to be communicating with the workforce. So there's lots of methods we can use. Obviously, email is a big one, but now with so many people distance working from home or whatnot, emails are are going to be overwhelming probably, and really think about, is that how your employee is going to receive good information. If you still have staff in your work area, infographics are excellent. Maybe creating a very small, brief, looping PowerPoint that you can put on your TVs in your office that give all your information. That's keeping that updated. There's a lot of opportunities, and you can use your imagination. But if you're a good communicator, it's probably the best time ever to become a great communicator with your employment staff. Next to communication is going to be the documentation of what you're doing. This is going to be absolutely imperative to prove that you made a reasonable attempt to comply with the general duty clause should something come up or a complaint is filed or whatever. Documenting what you've done and those materials that you've put out and all of those things is going to absolutely save you if OSHA should walk in the door and say, we have a complaint that you didn't do what you should have done. So there's a lot to the general duty clause in this, and obviously a lot open to interpretation, but the overarching idea is going to be just do everything you can to provide that safe and healthy workplace for your employees, and communicate it and document it. Slide, please, Nathan. Next, guys, we're going to talk about the bloodborne pathogens applicability to COVID-19. Then we'll move into respirators and fit testing, and then some temporary guidance that's been put out for annual fit testing for healthcare workers. Obviously, we have a large audience on the webinar this morning, and we're not privy to what the industries all of you are in, but I do want to try to give you a broad overview of this. So in the bloodborne pathogen standard, we are required for workers who conduct cleaning tasks, they must be protected from exposure to blood, certain body fluids, and other potentially infectious materials. And this can be found in 29 CFR 1910.130. I did not include the entire standard. It's a very verbose and lengthy standard, but I did throw up here so that you can see that that's the scope of application. So COVID is obviously a virus, but it does fall under the bloodborne pathogen standard. And in terms of that, if you're going to have your employees that are going to be sanitizing and cleaning and doing those things that Joe talked about, that's the extra step beyond what maybe a standard commercial cleaning company would come in and do, they have to be current bloodborne pathogens trained. So they have to understand the risks that they're exposed to and know how to protect themselves from it, in addition to what you're already providing them. A good news is most companies have first aid and CPR certified people in their employment staff. And those people have to be trained in bloodborne pathogens as part of those certifications. So maybe that's something to look at as your resource, or as you move into a more robust cleaning and sanitation project, is to elicit the help of your first aid and CPR providers, as they'll already have this training, and then maybe look at, hey, maybe I need to bring my training and my workforce up to speed, and what are the methods we can use to do that. So in terms of PPE, OSHA is going to be drawing directly from official bodies such as the Center for Disease Control, the World Health Organization, other levels of federal government for what the required PPE for this situation or for this virus is going to be. So face shields, face masks, meaning N95s and 100s, maybe even PAPRs, which are powered air purifying respirators, gloves, gowns. The level's really going to depend on what type of work is being done. For instance, if someone is just simply making a widget with a machine, they probably don't need to be gowned up and have everything on, but perhaps they do need to have gloves. That's just an example, depending upon what they're working on. Outside of PPE, we're also going to be looking at the HAZCOM standard. So it still applies. Any of the new chemicals and sanitation products that we're bringing into our workforce, those you still need to have the SDS resources available and posted as normal so that employees have access to that. SDSs are also going to be a wonderful resource for you to actually look at the applicability of a sanitizing chemical, because they have to tell you what it will work on. So we're all familiar with Lysol. I'm not branding or publicizing any type of, but Lysol is something that we're all familiar with, and it advertises 99.9% effective on organisms, on pathogenic organisms. If you've ever taken the time to read the can of Lysol, it actually has to tell you what organisms it is effective on. So any products that you're selecting, refer to your SDS, refer to that product documentation, and be sure that it is effective against the human coronavirus. Excuse me. Nathan, next slide, please. We can skip ahead one more slide, please. So let's get straight into one thing that's going to be large on our minds probably in the very near future is reporting and non-reporting situations in reference to COVID-19. So OSHA's official position on this is COVID-19 can be a recordable illness if a worker is infected as a result of performing their work-related duties. That's a relatively short sentence with a whole lot of interpretation. So what are work-related duties? If you have employee A that is in the period of incubation where there are no signs and symptoms and they come to work and their partner becomes exposed and gets sick, is infective or is employee A not a reportable and is employee B a reportable? There's just quite a bit of determining who is and who isn't, and the near impossibility of figuring out where someone was infected is really going to make this difficult. So there are certain conditions that have to be met in order for this to be a reportable for OSHA. The first one is the case has to be confirmed to be COVID-19 by the CDC guidelines. And as you can see on the slide, guys, I've provided some links for you, some resource links to be able to go in and look at these things. I don't want to take up your time discussing these documents. They are lengthy, but there is really good information in there. So number one, a case being confirmed, and it doesn't have to be all three of these guys. It can be any one of them or any combination. The case has to be work-related. As is outlined in 1904.5 for what is the definition of work-related. And the case has to fall under one or more of the general recording criteria that's listed in 1904.7. Slide, please, Nathan. So as you can see, guys, there's, from a regulatory standpoint, there's quite a few things that are relevant and applicable to our COVID-19 crisis at the moment. We at Life and Safety are diligently going through these resources and speaking with the people that are in the know and getting interpretations, but it's an evolving situation, and we will be putting out more on this in greater detail in our webinar next week. But we wanted to give you some resources right now that you could go to and look at. And I really appreciate your time. I hope that this was helpful for you. And Nathan, I'm going to hand it back to you, sir.
All right. Thank you, TC. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you guys presenting today. In order to respect everyone's time today, we kept this webinar short. We're keeping it right at half an hour. That's why we're not doing a question and answer this time around. We will be doing one next week. There's a survey that's going to go out after this webinar. It'll include questions with information about feedback on how we did this time, as well as questions that you'd like to have answered. We'll be releasing that during the next week, as well as during the Q&A at the end of next week's training session. We're also in the process of building a COVID-19 business assessment and mitigation program that includes the gap assessment that the guys just talked about, incorporates training and support resources that you all will be able to use. I'm going to go ahead and again close out this meeting here in just a moment. Thank you everyone so much for attending today. Appreciate you spending time with us. And this PowerPoint that everyone has been looking at, or that some of you have been able to see, we are going to send it to all of the attendees. Everybody who registered will get a copy of this PowerPoint, as well as that survey that I just mentioned. So again, thank you everyone very much. Have a great day. Be safe and stay healthy out there.